Hello, everyone, and welcome to my knowledge speech. Initially, right off the bat, I'm going to say that this is probably one of the more harder speeches for me. It took me quite a bit of time to even think about what I could teach all of you or what I do well. And the only thing that I could consider that I do well is my job as an ABA paraprofessional. I have a background as a former RBT, which is also known as a registered behavior technician. And that mostly encompasses understanding human behavior and applied behavior analysis. Now, if you've ever heard of B.F. Skinner, he is a renowned psychologist known for applied behavior analysis and operant conditioning. And while I'm not going to really delve into that aspect, I am going to talk about how I use the functions of behavior in order to help me to address behavior when I'm working with children that have disabilities. Now, there are four functions of behavior. Now, behavior could be either sensory related, so that could be automatic. Think of things that somebody does that make them internally feel good. Or it could be tangible. What is the child doing in order for them to gain access to an item or an activity? Another function of behavior could be escape. And that's avoidance. What are they trying to, escape or get out of, whether it be a task, etc. And then the last function of a behavior is attention. What is the child trying to elicit out of another person in order to gain that person's attention? So those are the four functions of behavior, and I use that when it comes to trying to address behavior when I work with children. Now, for example, one of the students in a sub-separate program that I work in, he would love to spin around in circles over and over and over again. He was nonverbal, he used assistive technology, and he had an iPad, strapped to him. And he would do that prior to any sort of activity that involved like a morning group activity or something where you really needed to sit and attend and think. And everybody would panic. The teachers would rush to him to try to stop him from spinning. The other parents would try to stop him as well because, he could injure somebody else or himself. But I looked at that behavior very differently. Not only, I was trying to think of why was he doing that behavior and what was he getting out of it? So most people, they consider, people to have five senses, hearing, sight, taste, touch, and smell. But in actuality, we have seven, and the other two are proprioceptive and vestibular. And that is what he was trying to, get. He was trying to, from his vestibular and proprioceptive input through spinning, it was helping to ground him in order for him to attend. So this was also, the function was sensory related. It was automatic. And once, I informed everybody that we needed to replace that behavior with something very similar, it worked. And he wasn't spinning anymore, and we were able to replace the behavior with something new to be able to help him and to be able to keep everybody else safe. So now I'm going to talk a bit about my first initial experience working as a ABA para in a school district with a student. He was known for swearing. In fact, not only did he swear a lot, but he also had loud vocalizations, screaming, that impacted all the students in their academic learning. And he also used a talker, which helped him. He could verbalize, but it helped him when he struggled to verbalize. And when I first started working with him, it was me and another para, and we would rotate. 1 week she would work with him, and then the next week I would work with him. But she couldn't handle his behaviors anymore, and she requested to be removed from his case. And then it was just me working with him. So the first time that I worked with him, I paid attention to his behavior and what he was doing. The first thing he ever said to me was he would go into his talker and he'd go to the negative folder. And in the negative folder were all these negative words. Words like shut up and I hate you. And I had to go into a breakout room with him where we had to work on functional academics, like learning to count. And the first thing he said to me was he went into his talker and he said, shut up. But he would say, shut the F up. And he would perseverate on that. So he would say it throughout the entire day in school, around his peers, around other teachers. They would be providing the kind of attention to that type of behavior, telling him to stop saying that. And, we don't say that. And, he wasn't, it just made it worse. He would kept saying it over and over again. But I would sit there and I would tell him, like, when he told me to shut the F up, I said, I'd love to, but we still need to do our work. And then there was another time where he went into that negative folder and he said, I hate you. And I said, well, guess what? I like you. You're pretty awesome, but we still need to do our work. And that threw him for a loop. It really did, because I don't think he really considered that somebody would actually like him, especially when he's doing all these negative behaviors and saying all these negative things. But I also went to the SLP, the speech language pathologist, and I asked her to change the word shut up to something different, like please be quiet. And that really tripped him up when she changed that, because he went into his talker, he went into the negative folder, he went to go try to hit the icon shut up, but it wasn't there anymore. And then, he also struggled, with opening his thermos. Initially, I would help him with that, but then it got to the point where it was almost like a learned helplessness, which is something that I want to avoid. And so I told him, I'm like, I'm not going to open that for you. So he screamed very loud. And then the teacher came rushing over. Other parents were staring. And I said, no, I said, just like, he's okay. And I looked at him and I said, get angry at it and open it. And he struggled because he had low muscle tone in his hands. But he actually opened his thermos of mac and cheese, which is his favorite food. And I cheered him on. I said, look at that. You opened it all by yourself. And he had the biggest smile on his face while he was eating his mac and cheese. And so I would have to say that the one thing that I hope to teach all of you and that I learned is that you need to meet people where they are at. And that it's such an important, skill to understand. And I remember one day, over time, his swearing died down and, the screaming died down to the point where he wasn't doing either of those anymore. And I remember walking down the stairs of the school with him, and another student came rushing down and he stopped us and he said, why doesn't he swear anymore? And that kind of question threw me for a loop. And I was like, well, I don't know. Like, he just doesn't. But it really took me time and probably a year or two before I really thought about it. And the answer is that not only did I meet him where he was at, but it was connection. It's something that he really craved, and it's what people crave. Our world is so surrounded by, technology and being on our phones and iPads and computers that we fail to really connect on the basic level. And me just doing that with him was so pivotal in changing his behavior to the point where he stopped swearing, to the point where he stopped screaming in class, to the point where he was doing things independently on his own without me even helping. So hopefully, just being able to talk about this, that I could teach all of you that, even with working with children and understanding behavior, just meeting them at their level and just connecting with them and listening to them is the most important thing of all. So thank you so much for listening to my speech, and I hope you all have a very great day.